Mr. President.
Just a moment, Takis. We're pulling up
We
the
are
broadcast.
waiting for the C-SPAN
stream
to start. The biggest question was always, has C-SPAN improved the performance of Congress?
All right, Mr. Chair, we're
The answer
broadcasting. You're good
is
to go.
out. The jury is out. Well, yes. Oh, do we have timers? Okay, we are good to go. Good evening, everybody. I'm Takis Karantanis. I have the honor to chair the Arlington County Board this year. And in the name of all my colleagues here, Ms. Coffey, Vice Chair Ferranti, Ms. Cunningham, and Mr. Julius J.D. Spain Sr., I welcome you to our home, to the home of the people of Arlington. It is always a pleasure seeing you here. Mr. Ford, I hope that this will mark a new chapter in the way we conduct business with the Civic Federation. For a few years, I have to say that this meeting was part of the county board's organizational meeting at the beginning of the year. The intention was always to have an early check-in with on the county board's priorities and emerging issues, the issues that are brought forward by the Civic Federation. This year, in agreement with the leadership of the Federation, we decided to move this meeting to the end of February for two reasons. Number one, to allow for more substantial conversation and dialogue at the date and time in the year that is closer to our budget session, the season, which started yesterday, where many factual parameters about what may lay ahead would have emerged, and they have emerged. And secondly, to provide newly elected county board members, like my youngest colleague here, Mr. Spain, with sufficient time to be briefed and conversant in the issues that are of importance for all of us. I can't be more thankful, Mr. President, for having had the patience, for you having had the patience and collaborative willingness to make this meeting happen. I believe that we both share the desire to find a format that allows for substantially more constructive and therefore more insightful dialogue. At this short introduction, I have one framing remark at the beginning. So since the inauguration of the new administration, as a community, we're in the middle of a maelstrom of dramatic changes impacting thousands of residents and households. These are so impactful that they may change the Arlington we know and love. Thousands of our residents with immigration background are afraid to live a normal life, like go to work, go to shop, go to school. Thousands of Arlingtonians who work in the broader public sector and the federal government have either lost their jobs or experiencing pressures and have to navigate the kind of hostile environments not typically associated with the rule of law, separation of powers, or the constitutional order. So any discussion in this room cannot look away from what's happening in our homes, in our streets at this very moment. We stand firm with all resources we have at the side of every single Arlingtonian impacted. And I wanted to say that because I really believe that we have to frame our conversations around what is happening right now everywhere in this country, but very specifically here in Arlington. And I will also thank our staff, the clerk, Mr. Kushner, who is behind all this organization here, and also want to welcome Mr. Swartz, our county manager, who very patiently has prepared for this meeting as well. Over to you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the County Board, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I say agreeing advisedly since it was Takis's idea in the first place. But it's a welcome, most welcome opportunity for us in CivFed. And I appreciate particularly the opportunity to, after brief introductory remarks on both sides, to just engage in a discussion. That's what we've been after, and I think it will be very productive. In order to make the flow even. We will try to enforce time limits on ourselves. We have 2-minute opening statements on each of the 5 major topics we're going to discuss tonight. There will be a 5-minute period after that, which will involve people from our side shifting, because we have different people on different issues. But also, if there is time, we will try to get in questions from the audience if that is feasible. There would be a limit of 2 of those per topic. But we will be fairly ruthless on the timing, or we will be sure to shortchange some of the topics. So with that, I don't want to steal any time from what I hope will be a series of valuable discussions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. So we shall start with the first. We have 5 topics, 5 big areas that we'll go through. The first of them is economic resilience, which, is something that affects us all, affects everybody right now. I would like to start by giving some very brief introduction to the topic, and then we can go to a dialogue. So obviously we enter this year with the post-pandemic baggage of our structural weakness in our commercial office sector. You have heard, I imagine that you have been following yesterday's budget discussion and Saturday's presentation of the county manager. Economic resilience, because this is the word, did not occur to us yesterday. We have been working for almost 20 years. If most of you remember that this is not our first rodeo, it's probably our biggest rodeo, but it's not the first rodeo. I mean, since BRAC, since 2008, the Great Recession, the sequester in 2010, and the first Trump administration, which we survived. Right now, we are looking at severe workforce impact, including the destabilizing effect of federal layoffs and restructuring to mixed earner households, which is even bigger than just a nominal number of almost 30,000 households here. We have an immense federal contractor impact, which includes also businesses of the size of Booz Allen Hamilton, et cetera. These are businesses that move contracts in the realm of $20+ billion. We have a financial impact directly for Arlington County, $88 million. This is how the manager has accounted for them directly. I mean, imagine if we would be just rolling that over to the taxpayer. That would be like a 10-cent increase. Or 10 times what the maximum we have even imagined to do this year. We have a reputational impact on the region as a whole, and the core of the region is impacted first. We have the out-migration of workforce that is already a reality and exacerbated as we go, and that takes down also, pulls the rug under the feet of small businesses. So this past year, we finally got to a point where we could publish and we got to complete our strategic plan for economic development department. I believe Mr. Spain has a copy of that I would like to push over.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, I mean,
yes, for a
you have
moment.
me on the list. I don't mind going 30 seconds over because I think it's important to talk about that strategic plan and some of the key highlights from the strategic plan. As you know, our Arlington Economic Development Team, they are definitely aware of the uncertainty in the time that we're in, but some takeaways and key highlights of the strategic plan. We are, of course, an all-in destination for job creations and entrepreneurs and creative ways, and also our visitors. So that's one part of it. Next part is, dealing with advancing our culture. Arlington is definitely a very culturally diverse space, but when we talk about culture, access, equity, inclusion, that is also within the strategic plan, followed by a few other areas, all in business, all in on a thriving commercial area, all in on our tech jobs, all in on our small business, flexible and collaborative, adaptive approach. So look, this is an ongoing process, and to something our chair talked about, and I kind of mentioned a little bit last night, we all are innately aware of the strain of what's happening here with our business and our federal employees. Arlington has a little bit over 20,000 federal employees here in the area, and contractors included. So we are aware of the impacts economically, and we're going to do everything in our power collectively to make sure we kind of ease whatever the fallout of that, what's going on in the government may be. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Spain. So I want to introduce someone you all know as recently as Saturday, Nick Giacobbe, who's our Vice President and from Aurora Highlands.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for doing this. I think we're starting the evening on economic and fiscal resiliency as one of the really tough topics, and I think it's going to be a tough one to work through the budget this year. It's going to be a grueling process, and the threats that we're facing are very real, and we really don't know what those economic threats are at this point. In the past, CivFed has expressed concerns about the impact of the increasing effective tax rate and the impact it has not only on our residents, especially the most vulnerable of those, but also on the business community. The pandemic accelerated what was a trend that was already beginning. We were starting to look at the paradigm of hybrid work and the de-agglomeration of business districts. It's happened across the country, and we've seen the real impact here in Arlington, especially on our commercial real estate sector. So folks have been trying to get people back to work. The federal government is pushing hard, as you keep hearing, to get everyone back in the office for 5 days a week. Amazon has been pushing to get folks back in the office 5 days a week. But there are others who are not going to. The big four consulting firms, many contractors who are prevalent in our labor market are deciding that the hybrid work situation works, and so they're sticking with it. And that will have an impact on revenues for the county. Looking at some numbers, Castle Systems runs a return to work barometer, which I'm sure you know about, and they look at office utilization in 10 cities across the country. This week, office utilization was at 51.5% of pre-COVID levels, and for the DC metro area, it was 51.1%. Another positive note is that Metro is having its largest rush hour ridership this week since pre-pandemic, so things are starting to improve. But we're also looking at the downsizing of the federal government, and we need to prepare for the really important impact that's going to have, as you've both mentioned. Just today, an order went out to all of the federal agencies to develop plans for moving their workforce and their work outside of the DC metro area. So that's a real thing that's going to be hitting pretty soon. And in the past, we thought we were fairly recession-proof because we had federal government, we had federal employees, but that's just not the case this time around. So we need to look at what's going to happen with revenues, what's going to happen with expenses, and that's the tough decision as you prepare for a budget that needs to last for basically the next 18 months. So we're at a crossroads, okay, and we need to adopt to this new paradigm. So my two colleagues, Nicole Toulouse and Michael Dowell, will be joining me in this conversation.
On to
We're
you.
just going to start.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Thank you all for having us. This is obviously a very difficult time, and taking kind of a big step back too in the why of economic resiliency and why it's so important, especially for our fiscal impact in our budget. When you're talking about the vacancy rates being really high, that's impacting the commercial real estate values of those office buildings and decreasing that revenue stream. When you're talking about people not returning to office, you're reducing our sales and meals tax, so people are not shopping for lunch every day. When you're talking about whether or not if you're talking about the overall commercial real estate revenue, you're also talking about apartments. So it's not just the office tenancy and the valuations of those offices. You're talking about our ability to build and adhere to our comprehensive plan. And so I think something that Arlington has been doing well, and I want to commend you all for doing, is continuing to stay true to what your plans are and providing a sense of stability for that community so that they're able to plan and invest in Arlington for the future. So I am really proud of the work that Arlington's economic development team is doing. They've worked on your zoning code to try to bring in new folks into office spaces, and they've done an unprecedented job in creating an ecosystem, especially in tech. That's where we're seeing some of the greatest leasing activity in the entire region. And so their ability to focus in on that, and newly also defense contracting, which is potentially where there might be another area of economic growth. So I just want to say a great job to their team for that ecosystem building and building people from the ground up. And the office vacancy rate in Arlington is not good, right? But at the same time, there is this flight to quality in the region, and that started in COVID in 2020, but that has started to luckily taper off as you've gotten 5 years past that. Leases will generally be about 5 years, so you kind of have gotten to the end of everyone readjusting their size. And so you've seen in the commercial real estate data that increasing vacancy rate has tapered. And I'm hoping for Arlington that will hopefully plateau soon, and that flight to quality will continue, and Arlington will be successful in that. In terms of the tax real estate and the impact on rents, for example, in our commercial corridor, and for renters, every dollar that goes up in commercial real estate tax has an increased impact, obviously, on every tenant, both businesses and renters, and obviously homeowners as well. So that's a supply and demand thing to consider as you're looking at your tax rate.
I can address a couple of things. If you ask me what is the biggest effect or the biggest consequence of the vacancy rate, or what is actually what hurts us the most, is the potential of losing the workforce. So our strength is our ability to attract investors and try to create jobs, to be at the bleeding edge of new technologies, et cetera. It's not only tech, it's other things like green industries, for example. We have major renewable energy providers here. We have been navigating adverse waters. I mean, in the sense that housing is very expensive. It's not very easy to settle here, to attract qualified personnel, but we have had them here. The turmoil that we're going right now through is, if it has one devastating effect, is that this workforce may not be retained here. And that has cascading effects further down. It will make it far more difficult to replace. It is easier to burn a barn than to build it, obviously, right? So on the tax rate, we are trying to be extremely frugal, and what we are understanding is that we will need to work on our expenditures first, before we even talk about the revenue side. But the expenditures will be at the center of this budget discussion this year. Is there?
2 months.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Coffee.
I'll just
And
add on commercial vacancy. I appreciate you recognizing the work our economic development team has done. I know you're an economic development professional, but I think that it's really important to also note that the conversion process and the redevelopment process is starting to work. The incentives and the processes that we've put together, I can think of at least 5 on the corridor commercial buildings that are going to turn into residential, either through the direct conversion process or through a redevelopment site plan process. And so I think, we're seeing some of these buildings that are currently net negatives on our tax base, through the free market, basically make the right decision to pull them offline and turn into the residential that we so deeply need in this community. So I think that's important, as well as one thing that our economic development team has really been hammering is the 18-hour day, and really focusing on that, if people are going to be working from home or living where they work, how do we build communities that commit to not just 9 to 5, but what's before work, what's during work, and what's after work. And I think living in Clarendon, today was a gorgeous day. I can tell you, people may not be having their meals at the downtown DC sandwich shops and everything, but they are having them in Clarendon. There's lines out the door at Compass Coffee. There's tons of people just walking around doing stuff. And so it's a different system, but I think that it's kind of about being nimble and converting and not just sticking with the big plans, but letting the details of those move to what is happening and what the culture really wants to be doing. And I do think our economic development team maybe hasn't nailed it yet, but they're constantly working to be that agile team. So,
Mr. Joel and then Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, I know I'm looking at the clock here, and I just want to drive home something that you've already stated, and I think, Nicole, you actually alluded to this, and just for folks that are watching, that we understand that here we know that talent in and of itself is our biggest economic strength, right? And given that, we see a lot of movement going on in the economy, we're into the people's business, right? And so understanding that from an economic dynamic, I think, is also critical important, because we cannot lose that key talent elsewhere, because it's also tied to housing, right? They're going to need places to work. So it's not a singular, it's a lot of things that are moving on. And I'm a people's person, and we're in the people's business. So retain the right talent, the people that are in the federal workforce, the contractors, we're working on things right now, March 8th with some of our regional partners to have a large scale event. I think you'll hear about that later, to bring folks who may be looking for other jobs together to look at here within the national capital region. So we're doing everything I think we can, but there's still more to be done for the people, okay?
Should we go to Mr. Dole first and then to?
Sure.
Or Ms. Cunningham?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. I'll talk about some things that related to sector plans, and I did a little data this morning. The community, including property owners, businesses, are very happy with the resilience that the county has demonstrated over the last, as you said, 20 years. Key to that is this whole community approach to resilience. It goes right down to how we build communities, the talent, how we take care of people. And we've gotten smarter. So our Crystal City sector plan was probably a little rigid, and we didn't have a lot of activity because we couldn't adjust to economic conditions. And now we've got a Pentagon City sector plan that actually has that flexibility in it. So that was called out. Our transportation development is called out as a real source of resilience, as is the push to build housing and places for people to live. That's key to businesses attracting here. So there's a lot of things we want to keep doing. A couple of things that we need to start doing. There's two things to consider. One is, right now in our development approaches, we're pushing for maximum density and very high quality development. That could become a non-starter soon under current economic conditions. So what's going to be on the community is to decide if we are going to perhaps back off and go for some lower density where we've got density numbers in the sector plan that are much higher. We might need to consider going to lower density to avoid having the vacant building issues. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is the provision of community amenities. So we have a system in Arlington, which I think we all realize is not great. To get ordinary community amenities, we're reliant on extraordinary benefits and bonus density to be built out. I think with this era of low interest rates ending, that approach is probably now broken. And we're going to need to consider a different way to build the libraries, the community centers, the basic amenities that we need for the workforce housing going forward. And so that's something I think we need to consider as part of this overall resiliency. Okay, thank you.
I think we'd better consider moving on here.
I was just going to add two things. I think on the community benefit piece, and we may hit this a little bit later, but I think we are still getting good benefit, but we have discomfort about whether we are. Everybody wants a good deal. So that is on the work plan for the county auditor for this year. So you can expect to see more and probably be asked for some input as well. And then the second thing I just wanted to tag before we leave economic development is the tourism piece that you highlighted. And our team has been very intentional, and tourism is coming back. It was coming roaring back until Canada called and said maybe not for the moment, but we were making really good progress there. And that is I forget the number, it's every dollar gives $8 back or something. It's like very good return on investment, and that's very exciting. Similarly, culture and arts, as our neighboring jurisdictions experience different federal pressures, we have a real opportunity both to meet the moment from a mental health and sort of connectivity perspective, but also from a placemaking perspective for art.
Mr. Ford.
Thank you. So we will now swap out our teams here.
Thank you.
There should be a baton, some sort of tagging.
Bringing your letter of credential with you. Yeah.
Always role play, shuffle them up.
So, Jackie?
Now, yeah, you're on.
Red is go. Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be looking at all of us eye to eye and face to face. This is a great start to some different ways of thinking about good government and open government. The discussion before has emphasized how we are in a very challenging times. And when you're in times like this, it's even more important that we all work on what I know are our common commitments to good government and open government. We share those. But it's even harder when we have such hard decisions and challenges. So we're going to have to work even harder at it. First, we talk about engagement as an essential part of good government. And the models that we're often talking about are how to gather opinions electronically or by filing things. It's individual comments that we look for. I want to suggest that this model that you are introducing here today has a much better chance of being productive for problem solving and actually discussing, getting the context of an issue rather than just everybody, doing different things. So we'd like to focus on how we can have more opportunities like this for the public, not necessarily all with the board, with staff, with each other. So my question for you on that part, the good government part, is can we include this model of face-to-face discussion in other decision processes that we have? For example, the GLUP and zoning. Could we have a part of that process where people look at each other face-to-face, developers, staff, and community, and have a real conversation? That's point one. Second, the issue of transparency. I'm going to read you, in 2009, our President Barack Obama issued a memo on transparency and open government to focus on it. And he said this is his commitment to work together to, quote, ensure the public trust and establish a system of transparency, public participation, and collaboration. Openness will strengthen our democracy and promote efficiency and effectiveness in government. He went on to direct that all departments look at new technologies. This was 2009, but it certainly applies even more now, that look at and harness new technologies to put information about their operations and their decisions online and readily available to the public. So I think that's a challenge that goes with our challenge to have more authentic and deeper conversation, is to have everyone have the basis for analyzing and thinking about the problems so that we can all work together equally informed on solutions. So we'd like to see this for Arlington and in two areas, and my colleagues are going to talk about those, from data for policy analysis to evaluate, as an example, John Huntley did use data for evaluating the equity of access to green space and parks, to what we expect from our website and the information that's on the website, so that we have some specific goals for what we want to get out of that. And we want you to help us with identifying your specific goals on that. So my second question is, as a start, what would you like to see, and can we work with you on a plan to make this a priority to specifically identify goals for the data that will be on our website? So I think the plan is it now goes to you all, and then it comes back to my colleagues who will speak about the other topics.
Okay, so how about I'll take the transparency piece and you'll take website?
With the mic?
It took comment on, but I think we all, sorry.
Mike.
We all will dig in here. I think the transparency piece and the data availability, I love that you pulled back the Obama quote, because I think it was maybe my first week when I started yelling and screaming in the county manager's office. I was like, FOIA, and Obama did it, we put everything up. And then I went and looked and I was like, oh, and then they took it all down before the end of the Obama administration. The FOIA and sort of like raw data availability is really a fascinating question, because there is so much data being generated today that the cleansing of it and the sort of sense making of it is a challenge that we all face. And so we're sort of all retooling a little bit to make sure that we can do that better. And I think that is a dialogue, right? So we've got lots of data sets up there. Some of them are cleansed well, some of them may not be. Some of them depend on federal data sets behaving, which are being pulled down right now. So it's going to be a fluid time. But I will say that it's been a real passion of mine to make sure that we are pushing the envelope on that. And I think that there's a number of people in this room who've been really close partners on saying this link isn't working or that data is no longer populating. And we're able to, with the county manager and his team, really push on that. Secondly, on FOIA specifically, which I think was in the list of questions you guys shared, we have been trying to make sure that we're posting what someone else asked about FOIA so that we're not redoing work. But like the Obama administration, the volume of asks and the volume of work becomes a budget question, right? So our FOIA office probably needs 2 new full-time people, and they're not going to get them this year. So it's a bit of a give and take there. And then I'll leave it to some of my other colleagues to talk a little bit about engagement models. But we do have, out of Arlington 2050, a lot of passion around further democratizing our work, and whether it's the conversations about form of government, or it's a question of, are the commissions really right for the moment? Do we do citizen summits? What are our town halls and in-person engagements going to look like? It's a good time these next 3 years, I think, for really fruitful testing of those. And I hear across this board and across our staff and across the community a real recommitment to democracy at the fundamental local level, which is messy, but is fundamentally a lot of dialogue. So I'll go over to Maureen next.
Website. I think Erica, Susan, Mark all know that almost every time, Mark is laughing and nodding over there, every time I meet with them, I probably bring up the website, and have been really focused on how do we transition from the website being designed by the people who create the website and having it be designed for the people who use the website. I really do think that there's so much content there, and most of it is completely unfindable. And I think that, we've had this conversation, like I find things sometimes that I can't even navigate myself back to, and I'm on that website every single day. If I can't find it, no normal person can. And so this has been a really big push for me, and I think DTS is involved. The Department of Technology Services, they're involved, they're engaged. I think we have further to go, because I do think that sometimes we get caught in the perspective of staff being like, well, it's there, and then people being like, we can't find it. And so I think when it comes to transparency and trust, right, like staff feel like they're trying because they're putting it out there, but the community feels really frustrated because they're not seeing it or getting it or receiving it. And so it's like, what are you talking about? No, it's not. And then that really breaks down the conversation from the start. And I think if we can get to that root cause and just make the website work for the users, that's going to really, really benefit everyone. And then I think on engagement systems more broadly. One of the kind of interesting things that I'm reflecting on as I sit here today is that most of the group here with CivFed today is pretty much the same group as in 2018. And the thing that really sticks out to me is that the two young people here, Nicole and myself, were the two young people here 7 years ago in 2018. And so I think, it's really important that we bring more people in. Jackie, you've been so passionate about this and working so hard. But I also think, how do we create other spaces? Given that people just aren't coming to the ones that we have, I think we need to go out and do new spaces that are comfortable for people that they, want to engage in, because it's not just the folks in this room whose voices matter, it's the whole community. And I don't think we're really hearing that most of the time.
Mr. Spain?
John, let's go.
I'm going to go to the next.
You want to go, okay, because I do want to say something, but go ahead. We're going to go to the next question. Go ahead. Adam.
I want a quick answer, a couple of things, and then turn it over for these more specifics. First, on FOIA, I think we have an easy answer on that. We had a group that was meeting with the previous board chair on the topic, and council, on the topic of FOIA, and how can we make it better understood as to why it is the way it is. We had, the next step was to schedule a meeting with Mark. So my request is that we resume those meetings, that we have a joint meeting with whoever the board designates and with Mark on how we improve the education about what it is. And the second thing about FOIA is it's supposed to be the appeal of last resort. So we're supposed to decide what people ought to be able to find on the website and do that first, and then it doesn't all come through FOIA. And on the youth, we have been working to try to get more youth. One of the things that we found is youth doesn't like to come to meetings where they don't get to participate. And so, and night meetings are difficult. So we're having to have other methods for engaging youth, and this is not it. Alan.
Thank you. So thank you, Maureen, for your comments about the website. I wanted to talk about that specifically because it has been a challenge, and I brought it up in this group, several of you already. It's visually appealing. It's got a nice user interface design to it. The user experience has been thought of a little bit in terms of what there's menus, and they have pretty much the standard things that you'd expect, residents and businesses, et cetera. But the huge challenge is, I think, a couple things. One of them you brought up, right, is there's a huge amount of data out there, huge amount of data. And I have the same problem. There's stuff that I can find one day and I can't the next. And I have years, decades of experience at information finding and analysis, going back to the early 90s working in a library, right? So I can find stuff and I'll bookmark this. I won't find people. And so that brings up the broader question, right? For the website specifically, right? Not focused on data analysis, but on the website, making information available to people, whether it's FOIA or whatever it is, or my trash pickup schedule that's changed next week, right, because there's snow. What should be out there, right? What should be out there across the board? Like for every department, every sub-department, what kind of information should be available? How should it get there? And how do people engage with it? How do they find it? That's a governance question from the very top, which is what I would expect the county board to drive a governance policy for the website itself and all the information that's there, because there's a huge amount of data, right? And without getting to the details of what policies exist today, that I think is a significant goal. And then the other part of that is, you talked a little bit about new technologies and the ways to engage additional communities. Everybody out here, I'm sure, goes to many different websites out there, right? How many times have you actually been able to engage with a person on a website, right? But they're agents. There's a huge amount of capability out there for AI, both for engaging with people as well as giving people the ability to find stuff and new modes of communication with users, whether they're younger folks or whatever have. I'm just going to throw out a couple of examples, which are simple and maybe not the best way to do it, but just as an example, right? A chat room, a way for people to, just a virtual meeting space for folks of some sort, where they can go in and post information, find information, have virtual office hours with one of you all or a couple of you all, just things like that, right? So I think overall, that was the question is, what type of information do we want to get there? How do we want to get it? And how do we make it accessible and interesting and engaging with the community?
And can we work with you on that?
Mr. Spain? Oh,
sorry.
yes, please.
Go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, because we'll close out.
All right, I guess red means on here. It's exciting. In order to, successfully meet our community's long-term needs, policymakers, whether casual participants, staff, committee members, or board members, we need access to good data. And as Susan noted, the county and APS provide a ton of useful data and analysis. But policymakers can easily miss out on important insights, I think, because the data that we produce is highly decentralized. It's frequently siloed. And it's frankly sometimes very difficult to find, even though it exists. Two examples of processes, one that Jackie's mentioned, that can benefit from better data. As a few years ago, we worked with Civic Federation to evaluate equity and park access, and we brought together lots of different data sources, and this required, fairly Herculean efforts to get all of this together into one place. More recently, people have been working a lot on climate action plans, and this demands a huge amount of data simply to identify who is affected and who is at high risk, who is affected by these climate changes that are driven both by global and local development causes and factors. But both of these efforts require a high degree of proficiency with Arlington's data sources, which may be beyond the more casual, users' willingness to engage. And so I think we should aim to make data more accessible so that citizens, at a minimum can simply understand what data is available, even if they don't feel comfortable with it, so that they can formulate and formulate answerable questions. And to that end, I have two sort of recommendations to make better use of Arlington's data and promote engagement. First, Arlington sort of needs a centralized directory of all our sources of county data, and ideally analyses provided by the public schools as well. We have a huge amount of data. It's spread around in various repositories like Open Data, the Open Data Portal, various dashboards, individual project and department websites, multiple collections of maps, and more. But somebody who doesn't regularly traffic in these would really have no idea what to look for or where it exists. A single website that simply archives or collects or categorizes or links to these sources, I think would facilitate greater engagement and hopefully would not be too big of an ask. The second approach, I think, to get people to engage more with Arlington's data is simply to ask more direct questions during the planning process that demand engagement with our data. So, and this is something which I think board members are uniquely and strongly positioned to do. Ask very pointed questions. In the past, we've asked people to evaluate these policies by equity, but ask more structured questions, things that demand pointed and measurable answers. In 10 years, how many kids can walk to this proposed playground? APS may have an answer for that. In 15 years, how many kids are going to be living on heat islands, or are underserved lower income residents going to be able to access new proposed facilities? This forces people not only to look outside their own little silos for answers, but the answers themselves directly inform the policy process and the cost-benefit analysis to make sure that your projects are meeting your goals.
Thank you, Mrs. Spain.
I know my colleagues will have some additional comments, but I kind of want to go back a little bit. But also thank you, Alan and John, for your information on technology. And I know that we have a board member, I think, Maureen, you're leading that commission there. I would also state that we have a long way to go, right? Just based on my observation. But some of the tools that you've mentioned that I'm very aware of, whether it's utilization of AI or generative AI into a platform to figure out how we communicate and communicate more effectively, I will tell you that's also going to cost some money, right? Because you're going to have to bring in the subject matter experts to run those platforms. It's doable. That's what's happening in corporate America today. We need to bring that here to local government. And piggybacking on that to local government, all of what we're talking about is also going to go, for me, to a larger conversation that I think about is, our current form of government and how it may evolve, and if it needs to evolve, and what that looks like, and how all of what you're saying is implemented into that new form of government. So I think there's a lot to be done in this new digital transformation age. There's also a point you made here about a social contract, which is more of a philosophy, right? But the people expect something in return from our government, right? And I think we owe it to them, our due diligence, to be efficient, to be expedient, and be responsive and also transparent as a representative government. So thank you for your thoughts. And I think, again, there's a lot of work for us to do, and I look forward to taking on some of those issues.
Any other, Mr. DeFront?
I'll just try to be pretty brief on that. Ms. Coffey, back in the dawn of time, when I was first elected, I think I was the first person who lived in a multi-unit building to be elected. I did own that condo, but in the history of, and I wasn't a renter, but, you know, that touches on the work that you've worked so hard on, Jackie, to bring other voices in. And, you know, now I live in a single-family home. In this room, I don't know for certain. I think that there is probably 2 people who are renters in this room. Maybe there's more. But sometimes it's what's not said that is super important. Like, I didn't, you know, the neighborhood I live in, I most recently learned about that when in the most recent election, when my competitor won my precinct. And so on renters, I mean, I don't know, you guys know, but 56, 58% of Arlington population lives in multi-unit buildings. You guys know as leaders of CivFed, but not everybody knows that. And some people who think that don't believe it. I know, my neighbors have said, I don't believe you. And I'm like, that's just a fact. So I think as we think of all of the things that it's important to reflect in good governance on what's not said, right? Because, you know, think of the big policy issues that have come up over the past, Amazon, you know, the big planning process on housing. Sometimes it's what's not said that is also super important. And I don't know that we have all the mechanisms, but I do think it's incumbent upon all of us as leaders to reflect on what's not said to get to good governance and transparency. Because sometimes transparency, I mean, the Amazon discussion, there were massive meetings where transparency was, in my view, aligned with demagoguery. And then there were 35 meetings with CivFed organizations, which were difficult conversations, but I thought that they were substantive. People didn't always agree with me. So I just think what's not said and reflecting on that is also incumbent upon us as leaders as we think about transparency and good government.
And I have 10 seconds on AI, which is that it's, I think, not clear to us from the General Assembly whether we're allowed to use AI in that kind of a way due to privacy concerns about government data, government systems, cybersecurity. And so I think we were hoping to get some clarity from the GA this year. I'm not sure we really did, but sometimes things are not as easy as we'd hoped they would be when it comes to technology in the government.
Actually, in my professional life, I'm facing that exact issue right now. We're implementing an AI tool at my agency, and we have a concern about controlled and classified information being uploaded into that environment. The remedy for that in our case is standing up our own instance internally.
Thank you all. We will now make another switch. The planning and zoning team will take their place.
Should give John the gavel.
It's over there.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
Throw things.
We're actually in pretty good shape, remember, because this is good. This posits
And while we're transitioning, because it really is a segue, I think Jackie asked a question about engagement model in upcoming, I think it was the GLUP and comp plan updates. You guys are truly right in the middle and on the scene. And right now, the Long Range Planning Committee of the Planning Commission is talking through their work plan. So that this is the right time, and you can watch it later, but it's in room 311. They're sharing that. And I think the engagement model will go across a couple of years on that. So there's opportunity for input.
Yeah.
Thanks to the board. Hello, nice to see you guys. Thanks for your time. I have Jack Spilsbury with me here tonight, and Bill Richardson is not joining. He was going to talk about lot coverage, but that subject is in process right now, and he felt there was nothing additional to address tonight. So, just to pick up on a few of the themes that have been mentioned, first of all, Jackie and John and Nick, talking with them, they have a goal of getting us back to basics and working together as a community on the whole to help solve our problems. And I think that, that's a theme that runs through the Planning and Zoning Committee on the CivFed. And how do we, we've had a long history of great planning in Arlington, and we've had some real success with transit-oriented development and smart growth and a lot of the things that we've done. And we now face a lot of change in our economy. The first panel talked about that. A lot of change in demographics. And, there's some panic going on. And we also have a national environment that's divisive, and the public square is frayed, seriously frayed. And so I think in terms of the comprehensive plan and planning and zoning, the committee sees that there's a need for change, and I think the Civic Federation embraces change and embraces moving forward into the future, but at the same time is not interested in panic planning either, and would like to hear from you guys, how do we reestablish our collective will as a community to work together to chart our future in a positive way? And how do we enact that in the comprehensive plan efforts that are coming up and address our problems such that they're not a zero-sum game, but they really add to the community as a whole?
Susan and I will talk about it. I think you did a little bit more digging on the comprehensive plan. We just touched on it with the question of, there's a lot of work done in 2050. There's also what Jackie mentioned about the timing for shared conversations as we rework, as we rethink the comprehensive plan. The history, as I understand it, of processes like that is lots of night meetings at civic associations, and also working groups and task forces. And that's the history, prior to the last 3 or 4 years, where there have not been. So, and there were those opportunities as we started the 2050 plan, but we're still, Susan's exactly right that we're in the process on that part of the comprehensive plan. And how do we think that through? How do we have the substantive, authentic conversations that Jackie mentioned, while also bringing lots of people to the table? And I think you need some of both, but I don't have all the answers on how to do that. I can think of examples where there were efforts to do both, and the conversations were less authentic than I wanted them to be. I have seen surveys where I looked at them, where I just didn't feel as though they were actually open-ended surveys. And I have also seen meetings in Arlington where I felt as though they're meant to be a frank conversation with exchange, and it really wasn't that way. So, I think we need a lot of different approaches, and I do think it is challenging to make those approaches successful in our planning processes because of how frayed the public square has become. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it, but I would be inclined towards an all of the above approach, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the point I was trying to make as this as we were segueing, is this is really the time to begin to engage on trying some of those different engagement models. So what's being said in the room down the hall is, the comprehensive plan update is envisioned as a two-phase process. The first phase is kicking off now, and it, I will actually not try to represent it well because they're going to talk about it with the experts in the room, and we can all watch it when we get home, even on 2x speed, which is my favorite thing to do. But page 11 and 12 of that presentation, which is posted under LRPC, does go into a little bit detail about what phase one is really kind of grounding us again in some guiding principles focused on our people, their livable built environment, interwoven equity, healthy and safe community, harmony with nature, economic resilience, and responsible regionalism. All of those are coming out of, other planning processes, but really importantly, our 2050 listening last year. And so this first phase is envisioned to have many layers of engagement, whether it's the pop-ups or it's rooms like this or it's other ideas that you have, and also to begin with some of that data analysis and trend analysis. So I think this will be a good and fruitful place to kind of push on some of the things that we've talked about so far today. Phase two will get scoped in that process, and I think roughly phase one is now and this year, and phase two is on the other side of another calendar year, I think the manager could say. But I think it's very timely, and I think really the call for democracy, the call for restitching that frayed public square is very loud in many places, and I really truly believe Arlington has the conditions and the appetite to really work on that. And we won't get it right every time, but I think we've named the need, and we have an opportunity ahead of us with staff and with community to try to get it more right.
Just a little remark on that. The comprehensive plan is not the starting point. The starting point is the spirit of community. Is sitting together and having an honest conversation, as Snelling said, about what kind of a place do we want? What does it mean to love your neighborhood? What level of diversity would you, welcome? I mean, you can see in our discussion about what transparency is. We've never lived in a place with more data about absolutely everything, and it feels that we cannot have, enough for making very simple decisions. Very simple decisions. We have a horrible aversion to do something wrong, despite the fact that doing something wrong sometimes and polishing and correcting is the way a community learns and builds up. I mean, God knows how many mistakes we've made in Arlington in all these years, and we learned from them. We are showing what has worked well, what doesn't work well, what could be worked better. Who is holding the key to this? In my opinion, people hold the key of this. The biggest single challenge that I see is to be able to include all voices. It's really the equity question. To be able to sit on the same table, those who have this background and the time and the ability, et cetera, and those who actually don't. And, we need to be invited in and have these conversations with them and see what makes your community great. What do we do about neighborhood retail? Is form important to you? What do you like? What do you dislike? So I think that we have, we have been a very technocratic place, extremely administrative, and we lost a little bit our human touch, the touch of being, working into integrated communities, and, accepting difference and asymmetry as something that is tolerable and actually desirable. And something, accepting the fact that we cannot always win, that reason or the perfect data set will not always win. Sometimes the other data set will win, and we will find a solution at the beginning, which is the bottom line of a longer process. So, and the second thing is, I am a believer in shorter processes, more substantial but shorter, because extremely long, prolonged processes lose their scope very easily and they derail very easily because the world around us changes faster. And that concerns me. That's something I want to figure out a way to align our decision-making with the actual pace of the economy, of the society, and of the zeitgeist.
Good evening. I'm really appreciating
The microphone. Red is good.
Of course. I'm about to say that I'm a relative newcomer to CivFed, and as a new subcommittee chair on planning and zoning issues, I wanted to drill down on a specific issue that we keep hearing about that is of serious concern to RCAs and generally to CivFed members. And that is currently under review by the county. And that is specifically the special GLUP process for changing the foundational general land use plan. And what we're hearing most frequently, or the calls that we're getting most frequently, is a desire for even more meaningful dialogue. And CAs, I think, can be I understand that they're only one channel, but they can be a useful channel. As someone, I participated in, I'm from Ashton Heights and have participated for 10 years in that process, and am chairing the Development and Planning Committee for Ashton Heights. But anyway, what I wanted to say is they want more meaningful dialogue and are offering themselves as interlocutors early on and throughout discussions with more predictability, more attention to issues surrounding height and density, especially in edge development near or within lower density neighborhoods. And again, what we're hearing is particular concern over whether the GLUPs as currently formulated are being used to make piecemeal changes without a broader review that signals the need for participation by residents more broadly and stakeholders more broadly throughout the county, given potential effects really on everyone, because these things get applied here and then they're applied there. But sometimes we need to talk about the effect on the whole county. And in addition, they frequently say that they find this special GLUP process confusing, maybe hampered by difficult transparency, and conclude that their voices are going unheard. And I'm not saying that that's a fair complaint, but it's a very strong perception that's out there. And I also wanted to say that the CivFed's 2022 resolution, specifically on, quote, to improve public input for planning, GLUP, and zoning change processes, as well as a recent letter to the board, underscores really how seriously we view this issue. So it brings me to two-part question. One, what is the board's view on the county's internal special GLUP review announced in CPHD's 2024-25 work plan? And what outcomes would you like to see from this review? And then second, again, offering up that we are very eager to be brought in early on into this ongoing GLUP review process, social GLUP review process, so that we can help contribute to a mutually beneficial outcome. And a key goal is developing clearer special GLUP guidelines that will reinforce meaningful stakeholder input and consistency with all the other plans, the comprehensive plans, what's being done on the macro scale. So then the second question is, how can we, the CivFed, best engage early on in the current special GLUP review and work with you and other stakeholders for a robust dialogue as it goes forward? So that's my questions.
If you're good, Matt, I think I might let the county manager use his one answer for, no, just joking. I know.
No, that is symbolic.
That's totally symbolic. I think he's hiding it under the table. We've had many, many robust conversations about this, and the good news is the special GLUP study squared, is underway and is expected to be completed next quarter. Can you share a little bit about what you're anticipating the outputs to be like, and to the question of how can CivFed and other folks engage now? When's the right time to engage and how to do so constructively?
Yes, so we'll be coming back in the second quarter, and I think the right time that we'll be engaged is when we're going to give our thoughts and suggestions to the board about adjustments to the special GLUB process. I have some specific views on that about whether we're using it in the right way, and I think that's what you're going to hear when we make recommendations to the board. But I'm committing right now to come to you at the same time and get your thoughts on that, so that when the board takes it up, you'll have the views of at least Ashton Heights on it, right, Jack?
And then we'll blame you forever. Yeah, so I think the discomfort, and for those of you who didn't tune in to all 11 hours of our Saturday meeting, there were several hours of conversation about the discomfort that has been identified. It's not just one project, it's pretty universal. And to Takis's point, really long processes that feel uncertainly, long get confusing because we don't have infinite attention span. So I think the problem has been named. The solutions are not yet put forward as options, and none of the solutions will be perfect either. So we'll kind of have that dialogue, I guess, in June, if not before. May, June.
Mr. Chair.
July, if not before.
June 30th.
Okay. June 30th at midnight, if not before.
Thank you. So I want to keep the public square strong, but I also, the manager's response said the word thoughts, and my colleague's comments said a study will be done. Those are different statements. And I have different views. So Ballston's plan. I don't think Ballston is here. Their sector plan. And yes, it should be done. Doing it would be years and would be exhausting. So I looked up, there's the 10-page special GLUB study piece. And in the process of the Melwood discussion, there were criteria that were identified and discussed. I like the option of special GLUB because there is a project in the works. Not we are going to, in respect to great planners. I don't want to think about the meaning of life. I want to build projects that serve our community. And I know that planners do too. I'm trying to offer some additional context. And, that is where, I don't think it's universal that this is a burning problem. If you ask me, I'll just say, if you ask me, do I want to do a lot of big plans, or do I want the parking lot on the East Falls Church Metro to have a tall building so that we can have transit-oriented development? I've just given my answer. And so, I hope that's reasonable to say. It should not be willy-nilly, and it should not be driven by developers. But, I think I'd love to, there's longer conversation as to the mistakes, but you would acknowledge, when the GLUP was made in 1959 and 60, it was not made for renters. It was not made for equity. It was made for homeowners. And the more you learn about the history of Mr. Lyon, he may not been the worst ever, but he also was not motivated by a deeply communal view. And so that's just to say, I think the work plan has 9 million things that we want to do. Listen to board members then when they say, I don't want to do that, because we cannot do everything on the work plan. So hopefully that's still civil, but also being honest about where I am.
It's coffee.
Try and keep it short. I think all processes have their strengths and their weaknesses. And, one of the things that I was struck by when we accepted the Melwood Special GLUP is I got a lot of history on how Special GLUP came to be in Arlington and the change that occurred in 2008. And a lot of the asks that were being made of where Special GLUP should go from here was actually the things that we were trying to fix from the previous version of Special GLUP. And so I would just highlight that pretty much anything we do, there's going to be problems with. I think that's just a fact of life. And but one of the things that I see a real need for is more civic education on whatever the process is, making sure people know it ahead of time, because I think local government, fortunately, is back of mind for most people until it's right in their face. And so often we have people coming to the table when there's a site plan or a special GLUP in their neighborhood, and it's the first they've ever heard of these things, and so they don't know what to expect. They're learning on the fly. There might be implicit expectations of what a process should or should not contain, that if we had more of that civic education up front, we might be able to get people in the right place at the right time to make the comments when it matters. And I think I don't know the venue for that. Civic associations could be one, though we'll miss some of the population. But I just think that no matter what the process is, getting people to know the process is probably almost as important as the process itself.
Thank you. Just an additional one, because Mr. Connor is an architect. I think that architects have been a little bit not appreciated in these, and professionals. This is important because they haven't been appreciated by us. They have been not appreciated by the public. Because I've sat for my civic association in SPRCs, where the immediate neighbor who had a problem with the entrance of a parking garage could take about 90% of the conversation, when the entirety of the building would take only 10% of the conversation. So these asymmetries are cut both ways. And the only class of people who occurs to me can rebalance that are the professionals who have the insight that Ms. Coffey has already alluded to. And I believe that we need to find a way to respect them and include them there.
I do appreciate it. Thank you, Brian and Jack. We'll bring up our climate team now.
Yeah. So the next topic is climate action, which rhymes a lot with planning.
Okay, my name's Mark Greenwood. I wanted to start with a compliment for you folks. I think you've come up with a very good resolution, and hopefully the plan is as good. I hope it will be. And I wanted to emphasize why I think it's particularly useful. The resolution is the first time I think I've seen an array of all the plans that have been developed in Arlington County that at least mention something about climate change. It's all there. I've never seen that before. But I think it's because of that, it's the comprehensiveness that you have done here, which is very important. And at the same time, I think it's very important that you've stepped back and said, the issue that needs the most attention is not so much plans, because there are a lot of plans. It is the design of the programs to implement them. And the analysis that you have set up here, I don't know all of the factors that you have listed there, but I do think it's an important piece of the overall need of the county. And so I think that's one I would want to ask some questions about. What I'd like to do, though, is make clear how we're going to divide this up. I'm going to ask a couple questions related to the resolution and some of the elements of it. And then we're going to turn it over to David for stormwater and Jackie for excessive heat. So, first question, I really would like to get your thoughts about this notion of program evaluation as it relates to the climate issues. Just to give you some examples, we have had the honor and challenge of working with folks on the questions of adaptation. We have spent time with the stormwater program. It's a good program in the sense that people are very committed. It's not a large group of people, but they are doing hard work and doing some good stuff. Certainly since 2019, when we had the great flood in Westover, they have come up with some very creative tools. They've come up with some good logic to their selection of watersheds needing attention. And there's got some real results, including the Cardinal School detention vault. And so that's been a good measure. Now, the other thing we deal with, going to the complete opposite world, is the excessive heat issue. One of the most deadly issues in the country. It's going to become more of an issue here. And it's one of these things where we have to start with the recognition that Arlington has no program on this topic. And it needs, therefore, to build one from scratch. And it's going to be a challenge to do, but we really have to focus on it. So anyway, I would like to see if we can get some interaction about how you see that process working. It may be too early to really say too much, but I think it would be useful. A second question that I wanted to try to raise was the reference in one part of the resolution to the idea of building partnerships with key actors outside of the government. And I think that's particularly important as we think about the relationships between the county and the folks who build our buildings and design them, construct them, and have very strong economic interests in getting it right from their perspective. And the idea of finding a way of breaking through so their perspective can be as consistent as possible with what the community needs and what Arlington wants is very important. So whatever magic you have that you're going to be pursuing on this to get that communication going, I think we'd like to know more about it if we could. With that, I'm going to step back, and if you guys want to respond to this, we can, or I can turn it over to my colleagues to raise some of the other issues.
Go with responding.
So, Mr. Spain, if you want to weigh in, I can start. Okay. So, first of all, from design to implementation, one of the reasons why we listed all these programs is because they are also testament to the fact that we have some experience of how we go from public, awareness to consultation to creating a policy by initiative, creating programs that then implement the politics and measure outcomes and go back, and we have this virtuous circle of learning. This is another one. This is a more comprehensive one. The difference now is that for the very first time, we try to see everything in its complete entirety, and we frame it under one, identifying the source of the problem, right? It's not only, the energy issue, it's also the bioclimatic building, for example. It's the issue of tree canopy and how to enhance and actually how to do that smartly so that it's sustainable and it actually changes and moves the heat indexes and the perceived discomfort of people, etc. This board has insisted in creating a new management level position, and you see now the fruit of this effort. So in the next few months, and we will, one of the expectations is that not only the climate action plan will be fleshed out with a lot of programs, starting with, most importantly, with public awareness and education, because this is a huge thing. I would posit today that maybe 50% of the problem are wrong decisions of private households. And then we will have the virtual circle of reporting, etc. On partnerships, this is an all society or all community effort. That means the moment that you want to build a house or renovate a building, or you want to make an investment here, you should think about climate. It should be actually part of your standard operations. This is what we are trying to do here. So we are very committed to that, and we will be in partnerships also with all of you and with all organizations that for decades now have been identifying that. We are a leader in this in the United States, actually. And on the heat island effect, I have to tell you, you're absolutely right. At this point, we haven't identified still the actions frame to deal with the heat island effect. There are very few cities in the world that have a heat officer or a heat office. It's very complex, and I hope we are not going to be there that we have to actually do that like cities with extreme heat, a really extreme, deadly heat, that we are going to implement so much in advance that we are going to be able to mitigate before we have to adapt to a deadly scenario of excessive heat. That said, out of the 21 years I've lived in Arlington, 10 have been record heat years.
Yeah.
Mr. Spain?
Yeah, I think you almost said it all then, Mr. Chair. There's still a lot of work to be done. And just before I say, we have some points here that we want to share from our climate policy office, but I am optimistic and very hopeful that as we have these conversations surrounding climate and stormwater and flood resiliency, there's something we really need to take in mind at the forefront, right? I may know a little bit about it, right? But when we talk about, we apply this equity lens across it, there's a lot of folks in Arlington that have no idea what we're talking about. Right. And a lot of those folks are the ones that are highly impacted by a failure, right? And policymakers like ourselves to put forward good policy. So this climate action plan, even though a lot of that is still early on in development, I think what we're going to be looking to do with our team led by Jennifer Ferretti, who was amazing, is really bring this whole of community concept and key stakeholders to the table. And we hope that you will be a part of this. Climate change, of course, is real, and there's no deniers here. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think we have a really good scope right now to chart on a positive course for Arlington. But where I'm most concerned, right, you could talk about the extreme heat and the heat island effect. We know some of these areas in Arlington, how we're addressing tree canopy across Arlington, when we know where some of the numbers are, how do we get up to 40% in years down the road? There's still a lot of work to be done. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We start out slow at first and increase speed of proficiency. A lot of times people just talk, but we can get there. And I'm very hopeful that with partnerships like the one we have with the Civic and many other stakeholders, that we can make a significant impact with the environmental sustainability and environmental climate justice here in Arlington. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. I would add only one thing. One thing that we talked a lot about are the co-benefits. So if we do the right thing, what's in for, it's not only a burden to be green. It has to pay off. And shaping that is really the point of having these partnerships, making clear what the paybacks are. So what do you get? You get a better neighborhood, you get a shadier place, your property values will be better preserved over time. Your planning will be better. The buildings will look a lot better. We will have a more livable space. This is really part of the conversation right now. And this is where you all come in on this.
Well, I think certainly the folks in CivFed that are part of this discussion would like to be part of that, if we can help.
Oh, absolutely. I see your own resolution from the 29 October 2024.
I was just going to add, I think our staff team presented yesterday during the manager report kind of the opening work plan for the climate office. And certainly a big part of that in the coming months is to kick off the action planning, which would include some of those, a lot of those measurable and kind of data-oriented elements. So we're started, and we're not just starting either. We're building on years and years of other things, going back to the community energy plan in 2019, there's goal 2 and strategy R4, and in our 2023 forestry and natural resource plan, there's also specific goals, and the goal of the policy office is to make sure that all that good work is not lost and it's pulled up, married with the new data and the new urgency that we experience, and then hopefully that data and those commitments really serve as a jumping off point for the kind of community engagement, the dialogue and the town square that we expect, because there is nothing like the climate to bring together young, old, and different backgrounds. And we have to take that opportunity. We have that opportunity. And I think the resolution as it's written is a good start. And the action planning and the ongoing accountability and pushing and coming up with new ideas is going to be how it happens.
Mrs. Spain, for a moment.
I just have a quick little ad lib.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. Look, I wanted to say for just a quick second, I really appreciate you guys taking your evening and spending it with us. I mean, everybody here, it's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. It's really great. But if I have a minute, I'd like to just kind of represent the people that are dealing with stormwater in the county. Mm-hmm. Before the crises we're talking about tonight that's happening all around us today, we've been having people that are suffering financially and the climate and the environment's being impacted by stormwater. It's constantly happening. People have lots of costs. Every time we have a big storm, we have costs. Every time we get our monthly bill, we have to pay stormwater insurance. So you've got people that are suffering all the time. And I know we put a lot on your shoulders, but I just don't want you to forget about this particular issue. Now, as it comes, as we talk about the climate action plan that you've got, what I'm really interested in understanding is, it sounds fantastic. And what's also fantastic is the stormwater ramp that's been developed. And that ramp is fantastic. It really says, this is where the problems are. But what I can't tell is, how do we decide which ones we're going to prioritize? And what I'm wondering is the cap going to somehow intersect that ramp and somehow inform it so that we can use it to make decisions? How is that going to work in your minds going forward?
Mrs. Spain, if you want, or Ms.
I can hit it. I mean, absolutely. I think that's the reason it needs to all be in one place. And also, things are changing. They're going to continue to be changing. But the economic costs and benefits and the co-benefits of each action are really, really important. We know, and I think it's really a good question to raise as we're kicking off budget season this week as well. We have, at least in the proposed manager's budget, there are continued investments in the climate work, even in a very, very tight budget year. And that is in part because those health and life safety issues are real, and the insurance costs and the real direct costs, whether you're a renter or an owner or a commercial building owner, are very real and getting more real, as we see in California and Florida. And so what the work plan that was shared yesterday gives a little bit of a window into is that action plan is a lot of work, both to get the right questions, the right metrics, and to intersect it with our budget processes and decision processes, which we've done very well on the equity questions that have evolved and sort of become pretty permanent questions we remember to ask. Climate will have a similar set, that there'll be sort of we'll ask a few questions this year, but it'll get really institutionalized in the coming years. And that's where we need your continued feedback. If you see something better in another place, like bring it to us. There's no humility of like, we have to build it and start it here. We're trying to get the best evolving system.
I have only one thing. Mitigation is always extremely more expensive than prevention. So I believe that in the last 10 years, so roundabout, we spent enough money to build a high school and a half just on stormwater engineering. So more expensive.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Prevention.
I couldn't help myself. This has
Sure.
been my professional career. Mitigation is way cheaper than response.
No, of course, but I said than prevention. Then, I mean, the moment that we didn't...
Even more.
Even more. So this is why it's called a risk ramp, right? So this is definitely where we are focusing. It's not only reducing the risk, it's part of the payback. So if we do the right thing now, we will be in for less pain tomorrow. And I think we took measures here already. I mean, look at the land disturbance, the change of land disturbance, how fundamentally this has changed, but it has also made construction way more expensive. It has drawbacks, right?
This is,
Can I speak?
yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to be able to make sure that's on the table so that it could be part of the conversation. So we're in a very different place with dealing with extreme heat, in part because we don't have a program. And yes, we need public education. But we actually need to educate ourselves first, because we don't have in Arlington experts on extreme heat. We don't have, and I want to call your attention, and you should have all gotten copies of the climate resolution that the Civic Federation did. This is not an overarching containment. What this is very specific, actionable items that contribute to being able to have programs in these different areas. And specifically for heat, the first thing that we're asking for is that we do a risk assessment of Arlington's heat risk. Now, this covers the social environment, the health environment, buildings, people, there are all kinds of things, but I would start with people. And we do know, in terms of things that can affect these outcomes, things we were talking about all evening are all on the list. So yes, it's tree canopy, but it's also space between buildings for airflow. And then the third one, which we are not thinking of right now, is ground that is impermeable and doesn't, so trees cool during the day. What cools during the night is ground, not trees. So you need a balance of those, and you need the air to be able to flow. So we need to educate ourselves on what that is. And I think right now, and this is part of the GLUP study and the site plan study, is right now what we have that's actionable as we're developing is to make sure we're doing no harm. And that is, we would all be devastated if our rush to build housing for low-income folks ended up with them being in heat islands during a power outage. And we need to make sure that every time we look at a site, we're thinking of the trees that will shade people and the ground that will cool them at night, because otherwise you don't cool off. And that we're building, all that we're building is people focus for the people who live there. So I'm going to urge you to, while you're looking at comprehensive plan, GLUP, and site plan, think about how you build into those processes, making sure that you're asking that question about each building that you're building. Because right now, what we do know about our risk assessment is the areas that are at the highest risk are where we have tall buildings and our transportation corridors. It just shows up on the maps really clearly. So we have adaptation, mitigation we need to start as soon as we can so we don't exacerbate that. So those are my asks.
Ms. Coffey, I think, or Mr. DeFranco.
I'm sorry. No, I think this is a really salient point, and I'll add one additional thing that I'm not sure we're considering as much as we should, which is the glass and reflection off of these buildings. I think it magnifies heat in a way that I personally feel in my own apartment during certain periods of the year. But I also, Mr. DiFranti made a silly comment recently about not being as into the vertical green space as I might be when it comes to trellises and things that are physically on buildings. But I think that's a really important part of the heat mitigation, right? Is, if we want trees, if you can't have a tree, how do we put green in other forms and fashions so that it's not just concrete on concrete or brick on concrete, glass on brick? Yeah. And so making sure that we build that green space into everything that we do is a really important thing for me as we move forward, because it doesn't have to look like the traditional, grass lawn with a tree, but it could be moss, it could be other types of planting that we might not be used to or even thinking about right now, but we need to keep that always rolling in every development.
If I could just mention one of the areas that's really done a lot of interesting design work on how to design buildings to deal with extreme heat is in the Pacific Northwest, as you might guess. And what they're really doing a lot with is think about the flow of air in buildings and how you design that so that that flow can happen. It used to happen all the time and people didn't have air conditioning. But that is a kind of an opened area now of creative design. And it might be useful to find ways of getting that kind of folks coming here to talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, I know
and then Mr.
we're
Spain.
at 23 minutes, but I just want to just lift up, some notes we have here about, our comprehensive plans going back to 2019, the Community Energy Plan and the 2023 Forestry Natural Resources Plan. There are some areas in there where we're, talking about some goals to make Arlington more heat resilient. And I get your point, Jackie, about having the subject matter experts basically in the room who really understand that dynamic. And as I close, I think I would also want to lift up something that we've been asked to do. There's a Get Green app that our team has put together here. And so if you don't know how to access it, reach out to us after this. But it's an application that's for all Arlingtonians to kind of tie us into. Oh, Susan's showing it right here. And
I have 69 leaves.
she has 69 leaves. So the Civic can help us with that, getting that word out on that new application that our county government is using. Okay.
Mr. DeFranti for a moment. And
Okay.
Well,
Thank you all.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, in reverse order, I think a thank you to you, Jackie, as well as Ms. Coffey, for when I mentioned that side comment, she kind of checked me. I have been in an apartment in Calorama where I didn't have air conditioning, and I actually thought I was, the sun came directly in. And so I can relate. I think you raised a separate question as to whether power will go out. And Ms. Garvey believed that we should plan for 2 weeks. I do not believe that. I think it's a reasonable concern. If we have 2 weeks without power, we've got bigger problems than that. But, one-time funding for a scoped consultant work to help us identify heat islands here, perhaps that's possible this budget. We have challenges, but that's the way that I would try to get educated, because the heat island that I was at when I was 14 near Howard University and in New York City are different than the heat islands I've ever experienced yet in Arlington, and certainly India, the deaths there, So a thank you to also Ms. Cunningham has tried to help educate me on this. A second thank you, and an answer to the ramps question. There are 5 hotspots. I walked through those houses, and I'll never forget it, July 8th. We could say that we've got to give credit because we have been on fire about we've bought some properties, and they're not cheap. Whether that's the best strategy, I think I agree with the decisions that we've made, but a specific matrix as to the precise order, the 5 hotspots should be the ramps priority. Beyond that, I think it's really hard to tell because you don't want to every civic association litigating against each other, but it is a reasonable question, and credit to the coalition of civic associations that have done it. And the last credit is really a thank you that's absolutely due to Ms. Cunningham and Mr. Chair for, we wanted a resolution. They made it happen. And I just sort of tailgated along with what they did. And so I just think the credit has to go to those two. You don't get standing ovations in this boardroom almost ever, and we did on Saturday. And so there's credit, and now we have, yeah, but really credit to folks, but also to our community for making it happen.
Thank you. Last topic will be housing.
And always remembering what the enormous privilege and luck it is to live in a community where 11% of the total surface is a park. And we have a contiguous air conditioner in Rock Creek, I said, in 4 Mile Run.
One of the big issues with the open air is single stair reform.
Okay. All yours, Ann.
So good evening, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the board. I want to also welcome Mr. Spain as a new board member and introduce myself to you. I know you're very familiar, but not in this context of the Civic Federation. So I'm the co-chair of the Housing Committee. Unfortunately, my co-chair, Matthew Hall, could not be here. I want to shout out to him because he is an actual affordable housing developer, and he's come up with a lot of really creative ideas that I think the board would be interested in. And that CivFed, we have been engaging some of the staff, and it's been productive, but we look forward to bringing some of these ideas to you. I'm also joined by Jean Hensroth, who's on the board of the Civic Federation. She's the president of Leeway Overlay Civic Association, and she's attended several of our meetings of our committee and has been very, very helpful. She's sitting in Matt's absence. So tonight, I want to gain a brief overview of the housing situation, ask a few questions about trends and ways we can engage on priorities, ours and yours, and narrow down a bit both on a resolution that we have for a housing tracker and work together on tools to shape our housing profile that are both creative and more inclusive. In 2024, we saw significant developments with regard to housing. Mortgage interest rates remain relatively high, but were down from their peak and averaged 6.7 over the calendar year. Housing demand stayed fairly strong. Continuation of work from home may have muted housing demand, but also drove commercial vacancy rates up to 22%, as Ms. Merlin noted, delivering a shock in the form of higher residential property tax rates to fill the gap. The county effected a zoning change to ease office to residential conversions, or OTR. There's already one such project on the table at Wilson Boulevard in Virginia Square, and we heard from Ms. Coffey that there may be 5 others in the works. We're wondering, what do you see as the 3 to 5 year potential for these conversions in terms of the number of total units, and would they be 1 or 2 bedroom units? We also saw in 2024 the county population grow again post-COVID by 0.9%, bringing us up to 240,000. Housing stock reached 123,700, and this represented 3.9% growth from 2020. I think we've already talked about challenges ahead, such as federal workforce reduction that we're seeing in real time. We haven't mentioned, but this has already happened, that HUD has cut community block grants, and we know that will also affect Arlington. So there are real challenges, as others here have acknowledged. We also saw last year 3 milestones for large-scale change in Arlington in the housing area: approval of the Langston Boulevard plan, the financing plan for the Barcroft Apartment redevelopment, and the injunction against the EHO effort. So a question here would be, how do you see the yin and yang of Langston and EHO decisions playing out this year? And how much interest in the Langston corridor do you project in terms of housing units? And could we engage the board on alternates to missing middle as a backstop as the legal process plays out? In fact, our committee hosted a discussion on this over a year ago with ideas from 2 underappreciated architects, one of whom is in the room. We'd be glad to start a dialogue with you. On Barcroft, what is the actual build-out timeline, and when will we see design proposals for each phase? So we mentioned that 3.9% increase in housing units since 2020, and we keep tabs on that via the housing development and CAF trackers, which are great tools and which Board Member Coffey referenced as recently as Saturday. These tools, however, only track projects that have gotten building permits or who have gone to site plan. They don't look at total capacity under current zoning. We briefly mentioned this in our CivFed meeting with Manager Schwartz a few months ago regarding this resolution that we passed in December in the interest of getting a better understanding of potential housing growth. The resolution called on the board to define the housing needs through 2040, to clarify housing production and preservation, and to develop a tracking tool that would show potential outcomes. Just using Missing Middle as an example, you could indicate the new zoning opened up a window for 6 times more housing units in the affected zones, but you might project only an average build-out over 20 years of 2 units per lot. Such a tool gives a better picture of the maximum carrying capacity allowed under current zoning. We hope you would agree to start some engagement on this as well with us, between the committee and the Director of Housing, Ms. Venezia, or the staff who do development trackers. Finally, I want to touch on affordable housing and your openness to new tools. Arlington properties were just over $1.5 million for single-family properties, about $536,000 for attached homes, and just under $475,000 for condominiums. This makes it clear that most of these costs are related to land acquisition. So the baseline problem is land price. I think we all agree on that. And that is why successive boards have come to rely mostly on density as the tool to achieve new units or CAFs. Alice Hogan of Navajo, who is a member of our committee, just noted on Saturday to the board that we need 5,000 affordable units or CAFs to buttress the market rate affordables and CAFs that we already have. Our committee has taken a peek at creative ideas from other jurisdictions, especially with Matt's help, and we want to encourage the board to do likewise. We have had in-depth discussion about these ideas, such as encouraging for-profit developers to compete with the nonprofits, programs such as one in New York called Open Door, that we have brought also to the CPHD just this past week for an actual church site development in Ashton Heights. We've looked at community land trusts and working with Richmond to explore tax credits for workforce homeownership, which is another idea stolen from New York City. The question here is, if we need 5,000 new CAFs, and the current program depends mostly on gaining CAFs through 5% density plus-ups, do you believe you can achieve that number through bonus density in the corridors? And if not, what are the alternatives? And would you commit staff to working with our committee to explore other options that are working in other urban areas such as New York City? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Coffey?
About 12 questions I tracked in there, I think. I'll start with office to residential conversion. To be clear, the projects that I mentioned, and I think the one in Virginia Square, isn't necessarily a conversion in the way we typically are thinking about it. Most of them are actually going to be some form of redevelopment. So 3033 Wilson, I think, is a good example. It's right across from the Clarendon Metro. It's a office building that I think they have reported is 30% occupied at this point. It is old, and as Ms. Merlene stated, the flight to quality makes it really unlikely that new businesses would want to sign a lease. And so that they are proposing to bring it down, keep the underground garage, and then build it back up pretty much the same height and everything, but as a residential building. And so the SPRC for that is going forward. All of those are going to go through the same site plan process that anything else would. Then you have a couple of projects in Crystal City that JBG Smith is interested in bringing through the true conversion process, which would be you keep the physical building space and the inside is what changes. The outside stays the same. And so
that use the new zoning?
Yes, that's through the new process. And so through the combination of those two, 3 to 5 years, I think we'll see definitely a lot of projects coming up front because people are really interested in getting these buildings off their books. I mean, these are corporations who are paying for buildings that are not making them money. They don't particularly like to do that usually. And so there's a lot of interest now, and that's where, I think Ballston 1, right at the WNOD trail entrance, 3033 Wilson, 2500 Wilson, and then the 2 in Crystal City that are direct conversions are the ones that come to mind for me that are in process right now. And I'm sure.
Isn't 2500 Wilson the special glove one?
Yes. No, well.
I thought, okay.
I don't know. I know that it's the one where Ladybug Childcare currently is. That's how I know it. And so those are all just things that have initiated since we created this new process. And so I think a lot more interest will come. I think the economics kind of demand it at this point, not just the county's economics, but business owners. Let's see, Barcroft timeline and build out. So this weekend we approved, or I guess yesterday actually, we approved one of the first new build on the Barcroft site. And I asked about, what is the earliest that you could see this getting built? And from approval to LIHTC application to successful financing to contracting and build, we're probably looking at 2028. And so these things go slowly. A lot of the rehab buildings have already been approved, and those are in process actively at this moment. But what is going to take longer is the new building. And so if the first one that we've approved is 2028, everything else is going to come after that. Let's see, development tracking. Your question led to an interesting conversation with staff because they first pointed me to the 10.0 population projection, and I was kind of like, well, I don't think that's what they're asking about. That's not the same. And I think that their explanation really helped me to kind of understand that it is as close to what you're asking for, I think, as we might get, because it involves an assessment of what staff think is likely to be built. With our zoning regulations right now, a lot of things could be built just as easily as residential, hotel, or office. And so they're using in the 10.0 projections their assessment of what they think is likely to go within this time frame. And that's based on site plans, economic conditions, population. And so, they list two factors, which is the development pipeline in terms of what is under entitlement or site plan process. And then also, assumptions from sector plans, small area plans, and special club studies.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So let's say Langston was approved and you have the 10.0 or, what are the previous ones. You don't go in though and change it, right? You don't say, to MCOG, we have to change these numbers because we just approved a huge potential pipeline.
I would guess that will come in the 10.1 round projection because we've been doing is it every year that they come out? So as plans get approved and permitted, they will go into the next round of projection. And so, I do think that there's always going to be some assumption here. I don't think that we're ever going to see 100% build out of 100% of everything. And so I think leaning into staff's reasonable knowledge of what seems likely to happen and adjusting on an annual basis is probably pretty much as good as we're going to get. And now I've been talking for a while, and I know Mr. DeFerranti would love an opportunity.
Well, I guess I would say you've been doing great. So, those are a number of fairly specific comments. I would say that, the COG goals, we have looked at those yearly and our staff engages with those, but they do not drive my day-to-day thinking, in part because up until last year, we have broadly been meeting those goals. I think the scholarship on housing supply is persuasive, but it does not define, when we look at a site plan, we don't say, are we going to make our share of COG goals? We have been. Frankly, part of the COG reasons for doing it was so that other jurisdictions would get moving on the transit-oriented development that we wanted to do. So it is relevant, but it is not driving on a day-to-day basis. I guess the one specific question, at least for me, the one specific question that, Langston, CIFED has been a leader in saying that geographic dispersion of affordable housing is necessary, and that's super important to me. And I've had conversations in the last 2 weeks that have been trying to, that are really focused there. One of the things that came out of our large housing discussion, at least from my standpoint, was that there was relative agreement that housing along the corridors, and transit-oriented development has been successful and that is an important thing. That's not to say that there was precise agreement on the exact amount of density, but we have transportation available. It's not as good as it should be yet on Langston, but it also is a chicken and the egg, right? If you have more density, we will also invest more in the 55. So I think that Langston, I'm very focused on housing there, and I do think that this is where planning, for me, is a guide for us. And there were guides on limiting the approaches that I think were quite specific. And those, for me, are part of trying to make sure that there's not a fear, frankly, of density with respect to their parcels right there that are massive parking lots that should not be empty Walgreens, for example. And this is not the Walgreen project that is moving. This is a Walgreen project that is closer to Langston and Glebe. So I think that we have work to do on Langston and affordability there, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerranti. Others? I can say a couple of things. I've been following the COG 9.0, 10.0, et cetera, et cetera. There is no question that the core of the region is losing steam, while the periphery of the region is gaining massively. That doesn't mean that our housing pressure is anywhere close to be more comfortable. It's just, we are still not producing the type of housing we used to be very good at. And that's one of the, one part of the secret sauce of why Arlington is such a successful place is because we were in the right moment from the 40s to the 70s in a condition to produce a lot of market rate affordable housing. This one we lost completely in 20 years. This went 80% down. Now we are able to produce luxury housing, and we are struggling with great fiscal effort to recover a very high amount compared to our regional partners here of committed affordable housing. But the middle, which is the market rate affordable, which made this down, is still a goal that we haven't achieved. And I think that when I think of Langston, for example, I really think about that, of the opportunities to repatriate the idea that we should be, able to build housing that is affordable while being market rate and not needing massive support. The problem for me is that, frankly, I think we have been fortunate enough to be producing enough value, enough wealth to be able to invest and make up for the lack of affordability, but we cannot. This is not a sustainable pathway to the future. So we need to find a way, and this is land use, this is planning. So Langston was a process that, in my opinion, has elements of producing the vectors of a type of housing that we used to produce from the 40s to the 70s, well, to the 80s, actually, and now we can't. The Columbia Pike form-based codes, for example, were also calibrated to do that. They succeeded to produce affordable housing and some market rate, but not to the degree that we would like it because of the pressure that we have still. So, and rents, Scoffi will have been an all-time high for now, 3-4 years? I mean, absolutely staggering.
I celebrated the only $100 per month increase in my rent this year. That was the lowest increase I've had in the last 5 years in my rent. I do want to go back because I think the ability to achieve our CAF goals was one of the other questions that you had in there, and I think it's a important and open question. It's something I worry about, especially as interest rates have gone up, and thus the cost of creating CAFs has gone substantially up. We have the Affordable Housing Master Plan, we have our annual update, and we'll do our 5-year updates. This is the 10-year anniversary of the Affordable Housing Master Plan, so look forward to some celebrations. But, you know, I think one of the things that is really hurting our ability to, you know, inch along here is just the fact that the cost of housing overall is going up so quickly, and so we're losing the market rate affordable at the same time as we're kind of chasing this never reachable goal on committed affordable. And you have people who before maybe, you know, had a place they were content in a market rate affordable building, and now they have fallen below the line and the threshold of needing true committed affordable housing. And that's, you know, affordability is all on a spectrum, and what's affordable to me may not be the same as what's affordable to some of my colleagues. And I think we've joked that I pay more in housing than some of these fine folks do for their mortgages for my 700 square foot apartment. And Justine Underhill, who's on the Falls Church City Council, had a really excellent explainer video on development overall and kind of how moving people through the different phases of housing and different types of housing alleviates pressure throughout the whole spectrum. And I think this has been, you all are probably tired of my metaphor here, but the big thing that keeps coming to mind for me is musical chairs. And you can keep, you know, changing and moving who has a chair, but if you don't add more chairs to the game, there's going to be someone without a chair. And so that's where building actually really does become important, because you can give people subsidies, you can, and the dollar amount needed to pay for those subsidies is just going to keep going up. So that's not a fiscally responsible way to approach this. But all you're doing with a subsidy is changing who is in that chair. You're not actually giving more people more chairs. And that's, to me, you know, one of the biggest critical things is I have friends who are 2-lawyer households who are ready to have kids, ready to move on, and they're in a 1-bedroom plus den condo, and they can't get out of it. Because at this point, I believe the latest statistic is that since COVID, housing prices have gone up 79%. And that's a national statistic. I believe Arlington, it's gone up faster than that. And incomes have not gone up as quickly. And so the people who used to be able to move from that condo into a small townhouse or into a small single-family home, now they're staying in that condo, and that means that young couples and single individuals aren't able to move into that small condo, and they're staying in renting, and that means other people can't move into those rental units. And so it's all a downward compression on the market that, at the end of the day, pushes our low-income folks out of the housing that used to be affordable for them.
Thank you, Ms. Coffey. Mr. President.
Jean, do you have any? Thank you.
I know,
Much appreciated.
John is done.
I want to thank you all very much. Thank you in the audience. I imagine you're frustrated that there hasn't actually been time for questions. I think a couple of lessons from tonight. One, we have hit on some topics that have engaged us. No question about that in my mind. Secondly, we've had too many topics on the agenda. So hopefully we will do this again, and we'll plan accordingly. I want to offer a thanks to the manager and his staff, because I know that there was a lot of work going into preparing for this. And I do hope we gave you a reasonable amount of time in which to get that done. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Completely aligned to thank staff first, who really made all this happen, and they have been supporting the process, and also not only the county board staff led by Mr. Kushner, but also the county manager staff who, scrambled to get us all the data and everything that we needed for tonight's session. I really appreciate everybody who has come here and everybody who will be listening to that and thinking about things. I know that with many of for our general audience, there will be things that we missed today in this conversation. And this is, the plight is the issue of what local government is, which some people define as 95% of what happens and what you see when you step out of your door. I don't remember how many business lines Arlington County have, something close to 200 or so. It's impossible to cover everything, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to do that. I want to make sure that our audience understands we haven't talked about public safety. I think this is an incredibly important thing. Safe communities are really one of the highest priorities that a community and a local government can have. We haven't talked at all about human services and everything that the Department of Human Services touches. Think about the mental health crisis that we have, not only from opioids, but now from other inducing factors. So to come full circle to the beginning of this conversation, Mr. President, reminder again that tens of thousands of Arlingtonians are under siege right now, and everything that we talk here affects them, and they affect it. I want to make 3 reminders here, or put 3 plugs. If you go to the Arlington County website, it is responsive to the search, immigrant, and it will get you to immigrant resources. They are not perfect, but they are useful. They are meaningful. You can use the prompt to put the word federal, and you will be guided to federal resources for federal workers. And there is a federal resource fair on March 8th from noon to 5 in the Wakefield High School, which we are organizing together with our partners in Alexandria and Fairfax County and for Falls Church and the 8th Congressional District. This is an incredibly important event for those who are directly and indirectly affected right now. So, and with that, thank you so much for this evening. We have some refreshment outside, so we can continue the conversations in the informal space.
No wine, though.
So,
Maybe.
thank you.
I could have smuggled some in.
Did you bring the wine?
Oh, I did. How did they make that mistake for you?